History is not just written by kings, it is traded by merchants. Among them, one figure held a quiet, astonishing power over the medieval world. The humble hay merchant was a secret kingpin of the countryside. By the end of this, you will see the entire medieval economy in a completely new light. How did the price of dried grass betray military secrets? What hidden wealth was buried inside a simple barn? We are about to uncover the secret life of the medieval hay merchant, a world of espionage, cartels, and social ambition, all built on bales of grass. What does it truly take to build power from the most ordinary of things? That power began with a single, unassuming commodity. The haystack you might picture in a painting is not just a pile of grass, it is a battery, a medieval power cell storing the energy needed to run the world. This was the fundamental truth every lord, every knight, and every farmer understood in their bones. Hay was not optional, it was absolute. The entire medieval economy, from the plow in the field to the knight on his charger, ran on hay. Think of the horse, the engine of the age. A war horse in training or on campaign could consume over 20 pounds of hay a day. Oxen plowing the fields needed constant fuel. Even the dairy cows and sheep that provided wool, leather, and milk depended on winter hay stores to survive. A failed hay harvest did not mean a bad year, it meant catastrophe. Communities would face the grim choice of selling their precious animals or watching them starve. Armies simply could not move. This made the hay merchant not a simple trader, but the guardian of the fuel supply. He dealt in different grades of this vital resource. Common meadow hay cut from grasslands was the everyday fuel, but then there was legume hay like clover or sainfoin. This was the premium grade, packed with protein, the high-octane feed for elite war horses and breeding stock. A merchant, knowing who bought the clover hay and in what quantities, knew who was preparing for war or investing in valuable bloodlines. The harvest itself was a frantic, all-hands-on-deck race against time and weather. For a few crucial weeks in late summer, the entire village would mobilize. Men scythed the meadows, women and children turned the grass to dry, and the success of the entire coming year hung in the balance. It was into this volatile, high-stakes world that the hay merchant stepped. He was the one with the carts, the storage, the connections, and the capital to buy up the surplus, to store it, and to move it to where it was needed most. He stood between the anxiety of the harvest and the desperate need of winter, and in that gap, immense power was quietly forged. This crucial position required a very specific kind of person. The medieval hay merchant was almost never a simple farmer with a cart. He was a businessman, a specialist operating from the commercial hubs of the age, the towns and cities. Picture a burgher, a respected townsman with capital to invest. He was likely literate, keeping detailed ledgers of purchases, sales, and debts in a time when many could not read. His network was his greatest asset, a web of connections stretching from the secluded monastic granges to the bustling stables of a city garrison. He stood as the essential link in a fragile chain. On one end were the producers, the great Cistercian monasteries famed for their efficient farming, the lords of sprawling manors, and the free peasants with a few surplus acres. On the other end were the desperate consumers, the royal stables needing to feed 100 horses, the city's wealthy households with their carriage teams, and the garrison commanders responsible for keeping cavalry mounts ready for action. The merchant moved between these worlds, speaking the language of the countryside and the marketplace. He assessed the quality of a harvest, negotiated a price, arranged transport by river barge or wagon train, and found a buyer often hundreds of miles away. To manage such a sprawling and risky enterprise, these merchants naturally banded together. While they might not have had the elaborate ceremonies and strict hierarchies of the goldsmiths or cloth merchants' guilds, they formed tight-knit associations. These were networks of trust and shared interest where merchants would agree on standard measures like the load or the truss of hay to prevent disputes. They might even pool resources to rent warehouse space or ensure a shipment against loss. This informal guild was less about crafting a product and more about controlling the flow of a vital commodity, a subtle distinction that granted them a different kind of power. They were not just traders, they were the nervous system of the medieval food-for-fuel economy, and the information that flowed along their routes was as valuable as the hay itself. This bustling trade needed a physical heart, and that was the hay market. Picture a town's riverside wharf or a crowded market square on a designated day. The air is thick, not just with the sweet, dusty smell of dried grass, but with the sharp tang of manure and horse sweat. It is a chaotic symphony of shouted bids, the creak of overloaded wagons, and the snorting of impatient animals. Towering stacks of hay bound into rough trusses create a labyrinth of golden corridors. This is not a quiet, orderly place. It is a sensory overload, and for the savvy hay merchant, it is the most valuable information hub in the region. Every conversation here is a potential clue. A carter grumbling about the deep mud on the road from the north hints at delayed shipments. A stable hand from a lord's estate, haggling fiercely over the price of premium clover hay, might reveal his master is preparing for a long journey or building up his cavalry. The merchant listens to the gossip flowing as freely as the ale in nearby taverns. He hears which monasteries had a bountiful harvest and which lords are quietly selling off older oxen, a sign of strained winter stores. He watches the quartermaster from the city garrison. Is the man buying with confident haste, or is he pinching pennies, accepting lower quality meadow hay? The quality of fodder issued to troops was a direct reflection of a commander's resources and, by extension, the garrison's morale and readiness. A sudden, large purchase of the best feed by a known royal agent could whisper of mustering troops long before any official proclamation. The Haymarket functioned as a living, breathing ticker tape for the medieval world. The price per load was not just a number, it was a complex signal. Stable, moderate prices suggested peace and good harvests. A sharp spike in a local market could betray a hidden crisis, a failed crop upstream, or a noble household hoarding for war. A merchant standing in that smelly, vibrant chaos was not just buying and selling grass. He was reading the hidden ledger of the realm, one whispered rumor and one bale of hay at a time. But all that whispered intelligence from the market needed a way to travel, and fast. This is where we uncover the first major mystery of the trade, the hidden language of hay prices. To an outsider, the cost of a load of hay was just a number. To the initiated merchant, it was a coded message, a flashing signal about the health and intentions of the entire region. A sudden, sharp spike in price in a town like Lincoln or York was never just about a local drought. It was a question demanding an answer. Was a powerful earl upriver quietly buying every bale in sight to feed the war horses of a private army? Was the crown itself preparing to move troops north, its quartermasters securing supply lines? Conversely, a puzzling price collapse could be equally telling. If the cost of hay plummeted in a fertile area, it might mean a livestock plague had swept through, tragically killing the very animals that created the demand. That surplus hay now represented a market in freefall, but also a potential bargain for someone looking to rebuild a herd. The merchant did not just observe these fluctuations, he weaponized them. He needed to get this information to his partners and clients before his competitors did. Written letters were slow and could be intercepted, so they developed their own discreet methods. A trusted carter, paid a bonus for his speed and silence, might carry a verbal message coded as simple market gossip. A purchase order for a specific, unusual grade of hay sent to a colleague in another port could be a pre-arranged signal. By comparing price data from different markets almost in real time, a network of merchants could map out hidden patterns of movement and scarcity across the countryside. They were building an early economic espionage network, one where the commodity being traded was not just hay, but the future itself. The year was 1346, and in the bustling Haymarket of Winchester, something was quietly out of place. For a merchant from London, the numbers did not add up. Winchester was a prosperous area with good pastures, yet the price for a load of prime meadow hay had nearly doubled in a matter of weeks. The local factors blamed a dry spell, but our merchants' trained eye saw a different pattern. The buyers were not local farmers or even the bishop's stablemen. They were agents for coastal shipping concerns, men who purchased in bulk and arranged for swift transport across the Channel to Normandy. This was not about feeding local plough horses. This volume and urgency spoke of cavalry, and lots of it. King Edward III of England had claims in France, and tensions were simmering toward war. The French crown, preparing to defend its lands, would be gathering its formidable knightly cavalry, a force that required mountains of fodder. Normandy's own fields could not sustain such a sudden, massive mustering of horses. They needed imports, and England, ironically, was a key supplier. The sharp price spike in Winchester was a direct economic echo of French military logistics. Our London merchant, connected to a network that reached into royal circles, passed this observation up the chain. It was a single thread of data, but when woven with other reports from southern ports, it formed a clearer picture. The French were not just gathering men, they were concentrating horses, which meant they were preparing for a major campaign, likely to counter an English landing. This intelligence, gleaned from a Haymarket ledger, gave Edward's advisors a crucial advantage. They now had a clearer sense of the timeline and scale of French preparations. While they could not stop the fodder shipments without revealing their source, they could act on the warning. The English fleet, tasked with carrying the army to France, could be readied with more urgency. Naval commanders, alerted to heightened French activity in the Channel ports, increased their patrols and reconnaissance. When Edward's invasion force finally sailed later that summer, it did so with a sharper understanding of the logistical beast it was sailing to meet, a beast whose hunger had briefly and tellingly been recorded in the price of English grass. The Battle of Crécy would be won by the longbow and tactical genius, but the campaign was supported by 1,000 such quiet insights. The Hay Merchant's Code had provided an early, vital glimpse into the enemy's mind, proving that the secrets of kings could sometimes be found in the account books of a grass trader. This immense value, however, created a powerful temptation. For every honest merchant building a network of trust, there was another ready to exploit it through a dark and dangerous art, the quality con. The second great mystery of the hay trade was not about reading secret signals, but about crafting deliberate lies. Adulteration was the silent plague of the marketplace, a scam where fortunes and lives were literally weighed in the balance. The most common trick was also the simplest, watering down the hay. A merchant would soak the lower layers of a wagon load or the interior of a tightly bound truss. The added water dramatically increased the weight, allowing him to charge for pure fodder but deliver a product that would soon rot, becoming a hot, moldy, and toxic mass inside a barn. This was more than just cheating on price. Moldy hay could cause colic in horses, a painful and often fatal digestive condition. A lord could lose a prized, expensively trained warhorse not in battle, but in his own stable because of a damp deception. Other scams involved mixing in cheap filler. A bale of prime meadowgrass might be stuffed with coarse, inedible reeds from a riverbank, or even common roadside weeds that animals would simply refuse to eat. The most sinister adulterers mixed in toxic plants, like the vibrant but deadly ragwort. To a hurried buyer, the splash of yellow flowers might look like harmless clover, but to the horse that consumed it, it meant a slow, irreversible liver failure. Selling old, stale hay from the bottom of last year's stack as a fresh new harvest was another routine fraud. This old hay had lost its nutritional value and color, becoming dusty and pale, what they called fox-colored. A cavalry mount fed this empty fodder would lose strength and stamina, becoming a liability on campaign. The risk, therefore, was not merely financial, it was a direct attack on a noble's military capital. A baron who had been sold bad hay would find his power crippled from within, his knights mounted on sickly, understrength animals. This turned every transaction into a tense duel of wits. Buyers developed a keen eye and a sensitive nose. They would plunge a hand deep into a bale, feeling for dampness or the prickly texture of weeds. They would smell the hay, searching for the sweet scent of clean grass or the musty, sour odor of mold. They would examine the color and the leaf-to-stem ratio, knowing lush green leaves meant nutrition, while a stemmy, brown pile meant cheat. For large, crucial contracts, especially for royal or military buyers, this inspection became a formal ritual. They employed trusted third parties, often experienced grooms or other merchants with spotless reputations, to act as sworn inspectors. These men would sample hay from multiple points in a shipment, their judgment final. A merchant's entire reputation, his license to trade in a city, could hinge on the word of these inspectors. This layer of necessary cunning meant the hay market was a place of constant, quiet evaluation, where a handshake sealed a deal only after every bale had been judged by sight, touch, and smell. The pressure to cheat was high, but the cost of being caught was ruin. Yet the greatest, most organized force in this trade wore robes, not fine woolen tunics. The Cistercian monks and other monastic orders were not merely spiritual havens in the countryside. They were the undisputed barons of the hay business. Their immense walled estates, known as granges, were not just self-sufficient farms. They were vast, meticulously managed agricultural factories. Here, the spiritual and the commercial intertwined in fascinating ways. The Cistercian rule valued manual labor, and they employed a dedicated army of lay brothers, men who took vows but focused on physical work rather than the choir prayers of the monks. This gave the monasteries a disciplined, permanent workforce that could manage the back-breaking, time-sensitive hay harvest with military precision. Their fields were drained, cleared of stones, and systematically rotated to produce the highest yields of the most nutritious grasses, including the prized legume hay. A single Cistercian abbey could own dozens of these granges, scattered across a region, each one a node in a sprawling production network. This scale made them the primary suppliers for entire districts. When a royal army needed fodder for a campaign, it was often to a great abbey that the king's quartermaster turned first. Their barns were cathedrals of grass, enormous stone structures built to hold hundreds of tons of hay, dry and safe from rot. This placed the monks in a position of extraordinary economic power. They were not passive producers simply selling their surplus. They were active, aggressive market players. An abbey's cellarer, the monk in charge of provisions and sales, was essentially the chief executive of a major corporation. He would study market prices, hold hay back in a good year to sell at a premium during a scarcity, and negotiate complex contracts that stretched years into the future. They would even loan money to local lords or secular merchants, using the promise of future hay harvests as collateral. This created a subtle form of control, binding the local nobility to the monastery through debt written in grass. Naturally, this immense economic clout bred conflict. Secular hay merchants, the townsmen we met earlier, often viewed the monasteries with a mixture of respect and deep resentment. The monks paid no market tolls on the goods produced from their own lands, a huge financial advantage. Their sheer scale could flood a local market and depress prices, hurting smaller producers. Disputes were common. A town's merchant guild might petition the king, accusing an abbey of hoarding to manipulate prices or of using its spiritual influence to secure sweetheart deals. The abbey's ledgers, therefore, hold a tantalizing mystery. On one page, they meticulously record the charitable distribution of alms to the poor. On the very next, they detail the sale of 500 loads of prime clover hay to the royal marshal at a steep profit, or a loan of silver to a knight secured against his next harvest. Were these books simply accounts of pious enterprise, ensuring the monastery's self-sufficiency to better serve God? Or were they the balance sheets of a wholly commercial empire, its foundations dug not in stone but in the deep, rich soil of countless hayfields? The truth likely lies in the quiet middle, where faith provided the discipline and the divine mandate to build an economic engine of breathtaking efficiency, one that kept the medieval world moving one bale at a time. Yet the power of the single merchant paled next to the quiet conspiracy of the many. In the back rooms of taverns and in the courtyards of inns along well-traveled roads, a fourth, darker mystery took shape. This was the world of the informal cartel, a shadow alliance where rival hay merchants became partners in profit. These were not the official, sanctioned guilds of London or Paris with their written charters and public processions. These were handshake agreements among a handful of men who understood that competition was bad for business, and that controlling the flow of hay into a hungry city was the ultimate business. Their goal was simple: to turn a vital commodity into a guaranteed fortune by any means necessary. The method was a brutal, elegant conspiracy. The key choke point was the supply route. Imagine a prosperous city like Norwich, its garrison, its bishop's stables, and its wealthy households all demanding constant fodder. All the hay from the surrounding countryside had to come in along a few main roads or up the river. A cartel of, say, 4 major merchants would secretly agree to control those gates. They would divide the territory among themselves, each taking a specific set of manors and monastic granges as their exclusive buying zone. A farmer in that zone could only sell to his designated merchant at a price the cartel set. If an outside trader tried to come in and buy, the cartel members would use their combined capital to outbid him instantly, or they would spread rumors that his coin was counterfeit or his measures were false, ruining his reputation before he could unload a single wagon. Their most potent weapon, however, was the blacklist. A producer, perhaps a free peasant who tried to sell his better hay to a different buyer for a higher price, would find himself suddenly frozen out. At the next harvest, not a single cart from any of the 4 merchants would appear at his farm. His hay would rot in the field because he had nowhere to sell it. His financial ruin served as a stark, terrifying lesson to every other producer in the Shire. The same fate awaited a difficult buyer, like a frugal garrison quartermaster who drove too hard a bargain. The cartel would simply stop delivering to him, creating a fodder crisis within the city walls until he capitulated to their price. Enforcement of these silent rules relied on the medieval world's most powerful bonds, oaths sworn on a relic or a Bible, and the interweaving of family. A cartel was often built between brothers-in-law, cousins, or fathers and sons who had branched out to different towns. Betraying the agreement meant not just breaking a business deal, it meant betraying blood and honor, inviting social ostracism and potentially violent reprisal. The profit was then carefully managed. They would artificially create scarcity by holding hay in their barns outside the city, releasing it slowly to keep prices high. They would fix the market price each week, ensuring no member undercut another. To the city officials and the common people, the rising cost of hay just seemed like the unfortunate result of a dry summer or a harsh winter. They had no way to see the invisible hand of the cartel tightening its grip, manipulating the very fuel of daily life. The hay that fed the plow horse, the cart that brought goods to market, and the knight's charger that kept the peace, all now cost more because a few men in a smoky tavern had decided they should. This was economic power stripped bare, a quiet domination that could drain a region's wealth as effectively as any tax, all without a single law being passed or a single sword being drawn. Controlling the market was one thing, but moving the product was an entirely different battle. Hay presented a brutal logistical paradox. It was enormously bulky yet relatively low in value per cartload. Transporting it overland by wagon was a slow, expensive nightmare. A team of oxen might eat a significant portion of the very cargo they were hauling if the journey took more than a few days. This meant the true arteries of the hay trade were not roads but rivers. Water was the only way to move mountains of fodder profitably across any real distance. Specialized flat-bottomed barges and riverboats, known as keels or lighters, became the unsung heroes of the medieval economy. These vessels were essentially floating barns, their wide, shallow hulls packed to the brim with golden trusses, their pilots skilled at reading the currents and navigating treacherous shallows. A single barge on a river like the Thames or the Seine could carry the equivalent of 20 wagon loads, with a crew of just a few men and no animals to feed along the way. The merchant who owned or chartered these boats held a decisive advantage. He could buy hay cheaply in a rural area, float it downstream to a hungry city, and undercut every land-based competitor. This created a frantic, hidden geography of profit. Wharves at certain bends in the river became crucial hubs, places where hay from multiple upstream manors was consolidated onto larger vessels. The ownership of these landing rights and the warehouses beside them was a source of constant, quiet conflict among merchant families. But the river also provided the perfect setting for the fifth great mystery of the trade, the phantom shipwreck. It was an alarmingly common tale. A merchant would report that one of his barges, laden with 100 loads of prime hay, had struck a submerged log and foundered in a deep part of the river. A tragic loss covered by a shaky agreement among the river traders that functioned like crude insurance. Yet weeks later, that very same hay, identifiable by a particular binding or a batch of distinctive clover, would appear for sale in a market town 50 miles away, sold by a rival merchant. The sunken barge had never sunk at all. It had simply slipped down a secluded tributary in the night, its cargo transferred to wagons on a darkened shore. The loss was a fraud, a way to dodge the tolls and taxes levied at official city wharves, or to sell stolen or adulterated hay with no questions asked. This shadow war extended to the land as well. To avoid the king's highway tolls, carters employed by savvy merchants would use a network of forgotten forest tracks, old Roman roads crumbling back into the earth, and moonlight paths across common grazing land. A bribe to a lonely toll-keeper on a minor bridge could make an entire wagon train disappear from official records, its journey untaxed and untraceable. For the local sheriff or the king's tax collector, this was more than petty theft. It was a direct attack on royal revenue. Catching these smugglers was a game of cat and mouse across a darkened landscape. Authorities would patrol known forest shortcuts, listening for the unmistakable creak of overloaded axles and the snort of horses moving at night. A captured carter might face a heavy fine or have his wagon and team confiscated. But the profits were so high, and the network of complicit innkeepers and stable hands so vast, that the flow of untaxed hay never truly stopped. Every bale that reached a city market without paying its due meant more silver in a merchant's strongbox and less in the king's coffers, a quiet transfer of power conducted not in castles but in the fog along the riverbanks. But that silver and the hay itself needed a fortress. The true measure of a hay merchant's power was not just in his ledger, but in the vast, shadowy space where his wealth physically resided. His storage barn was a castle of grass, and it held secrets of its own. In the countryside, these structures were often the largest buildings after the parish church, towering timber-framed cathedrals with soaring roofs designed to hold thousands of trusses. In crowded towns and cities, merchants built upward, constructing multi-story haylofts above stables and warehouses, their wooden floors reinforced to bear the incredible weight of desiccated tons. These were not passive warehouses, they were active, living systems. The design was a science of preservation. Ventilation was everything. Strategically placed gaps in the siding, called ventilation slits, allowed a constant, gentle airflow to pass through the stacked hay, carrying away the moisture that would otherwise invite spontaneous combustion. The very architecture fought a silent war against decay. Inside, the hay was stacked with meticulous care, leaving channels for air and for the merchant or his workers to walk through, taking core samples to check for heat. For the wealth inside was terrifyingly vulnerable. The sixth great mystery of this trade was not about movement, but about the static, smoldering threat of fire. A merchant's entire fortune could vanish in a single, roaring hour. Accidental fires were a constant dread. A damp bale, forgotten in the middle of a stack, could begin to ferment. As bacteria broke down the plant matter, they generated heat, sometimes enough to reach the kindling point of the dry grass surrounding it. A merchant might return from market to find his barn a pile of ashes, his capital literally gone up in smoke. But far more sinister was the threat of arson. In a trade war, fire was the ultimate weapon. A rival or a producer blacklisted by a cartel might see a well-planned blaze as the perfect solution. It was anonymous, devastating, and nearly impossible to prove in an age before forensic investigation. The flicker of a torch tossed into a ventilation slit on a windy night could erase a competitor's advantage forever. This constant danger turned every barn into a guarded keep. Watchmen, often with dogs, were employed not just against thieves but against fire starters. Merchants would sometimes spread rumors that their hay was insured by a powerful guild or even a local lord, a psychological deterrent against attack. The barn, therefore, was both vault and battleground, and within its dusty, fragrant confines, other secrets could be buried. The sheer, chaotic volume of a haystack made it a perfect hiding place. For the merchant operating on the shadowy edges of the law, his own product became a tool for concealment. Contraband goods like untaxed wool or even small casks of smuggled wine could be woven into the heart of a stack, invisible to any casual inspection. More dangerously, the barn could become a temporary safe house. A fugitive, a messenger needing to avoid the watch, or a member of a banned religious group might be given refuge for a night, buried deep in the scratchy, golden darkness where no bailiff would think to prod. This added a layer of physical peril to the merchant's life. Harboring a criminal, if discovered, meant severe punishment. His barn was no longer just a storehouse of commercial wealth, but of human secrets, a fact that demanded absolute trust in his workers and a willingness to live with profound risk. The scent of hay in his clothes was now the smell of silver, of smoke, and of silent, hidden things. But all that stored wealth was not just for feeding horses, it was for moving the world in a different way. In an age where silver coins were scarce and often clipped or debased, hay itself became a kind of currency, a tangible form of money you could literally weigh in your hands. This was the seventh and perhaps most profound mystery of the trade, the way a simple bale of grass could weave a hidden web of finance that bound entire communities together. The medieval economy ran on credit and barter far more than on cold, hard cash. A hay merchant sitting on a mountain of this vital commodity was perfectly positioned to become an informal banker. His transactions were rarely straightforward sales. More often, they were complex, long-term exchanges of promises. Imagine a freeholder, a farmer who owned his own land. The winter has been harsh and his hay stores ran out in March. His plough oxen are growing weak, and without them, he cannot prepare his fields for spring planting. He has no silver to buy fodder, but he does have something of future value, the wool that will be sheared from his sheep in June. He goes to the hay merchant. The merchant agrees to provide 20 loads of hay now, but not for coin. The payment will be half of the farmer's wool clip come shearing season, valued at a price the merchant sets today. This is a high-risk loan disguised as a trade. If the spring is wet and the wool is of poor quality, the farmer still owes the same value, which might mean surrendering even more of his clip. The merchant assumes the risk, but he also locks in a supply of a valuable commodity, wool, at a potentially discounted rate. He has just turned hay into a futures contract. Other deals involved labor. A younger son from a crowded peasant family might need to establish himself. the merchant could advance him the hay needed to feed a dairy cow through the winter. In return, the young man would owe the merchant 40 days of labor the following year, perhaps helping with the merchant's own harvest or carting goods to market. This bound the young man's future to the merchant's schedule, creating a form of indentured service secured by grass. The real power and the true secret lay in the merchant's ledger. This was not merely an account book, it was a living map of the community's hidden skeleton. On its parchment pages, written in neat, cramped Latin or the local vernacular, were the true lines of power and desperation. It recorded that the knight of the manor owed for 3 years of winter fodder for his hunting horses, a debt secured against the rent from one of his free tenants. It noted that the village miller had taken hay on credit, paying with a percentage of the flour he ground, which the merchant then sold back to the very villagers who brought their grain to the mill. Each entry was a strand in a web of obligation. The merchant, by holding this ledger, held a quiet veto over the lives within it. He knew who was thriving, who was on the edge, and who was one bad harvest away from losing their land. He could call in a debt at a crucial moment, forcing a sale. He could choose to extend further credit, earning lifelong loyalty. This positioned him as a shadow power broker. When the Lord Steward came to gather men for the annual road repair, the steward might consult with the merchant to know which families could spare the labor without ruining their own farms. The merchant's financial web gave him a political insight and influence that rivaled the formal structures of the manor court. His barn was a bank vault, his hay was capital, and his ledger was the record of a silent, parallel economy where the true price of everything was measured not in silver pennies, but in bales of dried grass and the futures they could buy. The ledger recorded debts, but the hay itself held a different kind of power, one that could heal or sicken a knight's most valuable asset. The eighth mystery of this hidden world was the merchant's unexpected role as a veterinary sage, a keeper of folk wisdom written in grass and herbs. Through a lifetime of handling thousands of tons of fodder, observing the animals that ate it, and listening to the gossip of grooms and stable masters, these men accumulated a deep, practical understanding of equine health. They learned which meadows, when wet, produced hay that could cause deadly bloating in cattle. They knew that hay cut from certain limestone-rich uplands gave horses stronger bones, while a batch from a marshy bottomland might leave a team lethargic and prone to cough. This was knowledge more valuable than any single transaction, for it touched directly on a noble's prestige and power. A lord's wealth was not just in land, but in the living, breathing engines of war and status in his stables. A single elite destrier, a tournament champion, or a proven warhorse represented an investment greater than a peasant's lifetime earnings. Keeping such an animal in peak condition was a constant, anxious concern. The hay merchant, as the source of the fuel, became a crucial partner in this endeavor. He moved beyond mere supply into the realm of performance enhancement. He learned which wild herbs, if deliberately mixed into the hay while it was drying, could act as simple medicines. A little dried chamomile might soothe a nervous horse's digestion. Mint could freshen the breath and stimulate appetite. Some merchants even claimed secret recipes involving rosemary or thyme to improve a charger's wind and stamina. This was where commerce blurred with alchemy and superstition. A merchant might sell a special tournament blend to a knight before a major joust, a mix of the purest legume hay with a handful of mysterious, fragrant herbs. Was it science or placebo? The merchant likely did not know himself, only that his customers swore by it, and that a victory in the lists would be attributed in part to his superior fodder. These recipes were guarded like state secrets, passed down from father to son or from master to apprentice in whispers. To share them widely would destroy their market value and mystique. This placed the merchant in a unique position of trusted authority. A stable master might consult him not just on price, but on a puzzling ailment. That cough in the south paddock, could it be the new hay? The merchant, drawing on a mental library of past complaints and outcomes, might advise switching to a different meadows supply or suggest airing out the hayloft more thoroughly. His diagnosis was based on earthy, observational cause and effect, free from the complex Latin theories of university-trained physicians. He was part salesman, part folk healer, and his reputation lived or died on the health of the animals that consumed his product. In a world where veterinary science was primitive, the merchant's empirical wisdom gathered from countless barns and fields became a hidden pillar of the medieval stable. His most lucrative sales were not of hay but of confidence, sold by the bale to men whose fortunes rode on the strength of their horses. That ledger of debts and veterinary secrets was useless without the raw material itself, and that material was at the mercy of the sky. The ninth pillar of the hay merchant's power was not economic or social, it was elemental. He had to become a prophet of the weather, a reader of clouds and winds, for his entire annual fortune was decided in a frantic 2-week window each summer. The hay harvest was a race against decay. Grass cut and left on the ground needed 3 to 4 consecutive days of dry, sunny weather to cure properly. A single unexpected thunderstorm could wash away the nutrients, leaving a blackened, rotting mess. A week of steady rain at the wrong moment could destroy a county's entire yield, turning a season of plenty into a winter of desperation. For the merchant, this was the ultimate high-stakes gamble. His predictive skill, a blend of sharp observation and folk wisdom, was his most valuable asset. He learned to read the sky like a manuscript. Certain cloud formations told a story. Mackerel scales in the sky, those high, rippled cirrocumulus clouds, often meant foul weather was within 3 days. A halo around the moon signaled moisture high in the atmosphere and coming rain. He watched the behavior of animals, noting how swallows flew lower before a storm or how cattle lay down in the fields when pressure dropped. He listened to the old rhymes passed down through generations, verses like, "Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in morning, shepherd's warning." These were not mere superstitions, they were accumulated data points from centuries of agrarian life. A merchant riding the circuit in early summer was doing more than inspecting fields, he was building a mental forecast. He would talk to the oldest shepherds on the downs, men who could feel a weather change in their bones. He noted the fullness of hedgerow berries, an old sign of a hard winter to come. All this intelligence fed into a crucial decision when to strike with his purse. If his observations and sources pointed to a dry, stable harvest season, he might hold back, expecting a good yield and stable prices. But if the signs whispered of a wet summer, he became a predator of opportunity. He would move early, using his capital to buy up the standing grass in the fields before it was even cut, a practice called buying the crop on the root. He was betting that his prediction was right, that the harvest would fail, and that the price of the little good hay that survived would skyrocket. If he was correct, his profit was staggering. He could sell the hay head secured at triple the price, becoming the sole supplier in a panic-stricken market. If he was wrong and the sun shone brightly, he was left with a huge inventory of hay bought at a premium, facing a market flooded with cheap fodder. It was a breathtaking risk. This intimate dance with the atmosphere gave him a terrifying form of power over his community. A merchant who secretly believed a drought was coming could quietly begin to hoard, creating an artificial scarcity that would drive up prices for everyone, enriching himself from the very fear he helped to cultivate. His barns became barometers of future hardship. When common folk looked to the sky with worry, the merchant looked with calculation, seeing not just rain or sun, but the flowing silver of profit or the ashen taste of ruin. In an age before satellites and radar, his intuition was his fortune, and a single misread cloud could break him. All that wealth in the barn began with a line on the ground, a boundary that was never just a line. The 10th and often bloodiest mystery of this hidden world was how a peaceful meadow could become a battlefield. In a landscape where every blade of grass was potential fuel, the right to cut it was worth fighting and even dying for. common meadows, stream banks, and the fuzzy edges between manors were not picturesque scenery. They were contested territory, and the hay harvest was the annual moment of truth. When the grass grew tall, old arguments grew sharp. A village might have enjoyed the use of a riverside meadow for generations, only to have the lord of a neighboring manor suddenly declare it part of his demesne. A monastery, with its ever-expanding estates, might quietly move a boundary stone during the winter, claiming an extra few acres of prime grazing land. These were not petty squabbles, they were low-grade wars over survival, fought with scythes, fists, and sheer, stubborn will. Consider the case of two villages, we will call them Oakham and Willowbrook, separated by a slow-moving stream and a wide, fertile water meadow. For decades, an unspoken agreement held. Oakham cut the hay on the east bank, Willowbrook on the west, but one dry summer the stream shrank to a trickle. The grass on Oakham's side grew thin and patchy, while the west bank, fed by a hidden spring, remained lush and green. As harvest time neared, the men of Oakham looked across the stream with hungry eyes. The old agreement, they muttered, was based on equal bounty. This was not equal. Tensions simmered until the morning the Willowbrook haywarden arrived with his crew to find a dozen men from Oakham already swinging their scythes on the contested west bank. Shouts erupted, then threats. Scythes, tools of creation moments before, were raised as weapons. A fistfight broke out, men rolling in the uncut grass, their blood mingling with the morning dew. The Oakham men, outnumbered, were driven back across the stream, but they returned that night with torches. They did not burn the meadow that would destroy the prize, but they set fire to the willow hurdles Willowbrook had erected as a boundary marker, a declaration of scorched earth contempt. This was a hay war, a small-scale conflict that could paralyze a community. The hay merchant from the nearby market town was now in a terrible bind. He had contracts with both villages. The hay from that very meadow was promised to the bishop's stables. If he bought the contested hay from Oakham, he legitimized their claim and made an enemy of Willowbrook forever. If he bought from Willowbrook, he risked his carts being ambushed by Oakham men on the road. His solution was a masterpiece of dangerous diplomacy. He refused to buy from either side until the dispute was settled. Then, quietly, he offered to advance both villages a loan of hay from his own stores to see them through the immediate crisis, with the understanding that the loan would be repaid from next year's uncontested harvest. He was not being altruistic. He was protecting his supply chain and positioning himself as the indispensable peacemaker. The conflict, now drained of its immediate urgency, moved from the meadow to the manor court. Charters were dug out of dusty chests. Elderly villagers gave sworn testimony about where they remembered their grandfather's cutting. The hay merchant's own records of past purchases were subpoenaed as evidence of customary use. In the end, the Lord Steward imposed a compromise, splitting the meadow along a new line that satisfied no one but prevented open warfare. The merchant resumed his purchases, but now from a divided field, his carts a rolling reminder of a fragile peace bought with bruised flesh and legal parchment. For the merchant, every load of hay from a borderland came with a hidden question. Was he buying fodder, or was he buying into a feud? The grass itself was silent, but the men who cut it were not. A savvy merchant learned to listen for the tension in a seller's voice, to notice if a load was delivered at night from an odd direction. That hay might be cheaper, but it was hot with conflict, and trading in it could draw him into a world of vendettas that had nothing to do with commerce and everything to do with honor and land. In this way, the hay trade was woven into the very fabric of territorial strife. The meadow was not just a source of wealth, it was a symbol of identity and rights. A village would fight for its hay not merely because it needed the fodder, but because losing that right meant a slow erosion of its independence, a submission to a neighbor's or a lord's will. The merchant, moving through these contested spaces, became a temporary bridge and a permanent witness. His ledger, in the end, might record the sale, but the memory of the fight, of the blood on the grass, was a debt that no parchment could ever fully settle. The blood feuds over meadow borders were a local affair, but another kind of traveler moved along well-worn paths that crossed kingdoms. The great pilgrimages of the Middle Ages were not just spiritual journeys, they were massive seasonal migrations of people and animals, and they ran on hay. For the canny merchant, this created a niche market as reliable as the turning of the seasons, the business of supplying the faithful on the move. Think of the great routes like the Way of St. James leading to Santiago de Compostela, or the roads to Canterbury, Rome, or Jerusalem. Each spring and summer, thousands of pilgrims would take to these paths. Wealthier pilgrims rode palfreys, gentle riding horses, while their servants and baggage followed on pack mules or in carts drawn by oxen. Even the humbler pilgrim on foot might have a donkey to carry their bedroll and food. This endless river of humanity was also a river of hungry mouths, all needing fuel. A merchant with an eye for opportunity would not wait for these travelers to come to a city market. He would meet them where their need was most acute, along the lonely stretches between towns. He established informal supply points at predictable spots, a river crossing, a forest clearing, a crossroads near a wayside shrine. Here, he would have a seasonal barn or simply park his wagons. His product was not just hay, but certainty in an uncertain journey. A pilgrim master organizing a large group would contract with such a merchant in advance, paying for fodder to be waiting at specific stops, ensuring his animals stayed strong for the long haul. This trade was beautifully predictable. The merchant knew roughly how many pilgrims would pass after Easter. He knew the dates of major feast days that spurred travel, and he could plan his inventory and prices accordingly. It was a low-risk, steady income stream, a welcome counterbalance to the volatile harvest markets back home. But the true mystery of the pilgrim trade lay in the extra services that blossomed around the hay bale. A merchant stationed at a remote pass became more than a fodder salesman. He became a one-stop shop for pilgrimage needs. He often acted as a guide, selling his knowledge of the road ahead. For a few coins, he would warn of a washed-out bridge 5 miles ahead, or recommend a safer, if longer, path around a bandit-infested woods. He might also function as a rudimentary money changer, swapping a pilgrim's foreign coins for local currency, always at a rate favorable to himself. Most importantly, he was a fountain of information, though its purity was always in question. He traded in rumors and reports from the travelers who had passed through the day before. He could tell you which monastic hostels were full, which were serving meat on a Friday, and which had a reputation for overcharging. His news from farther down the road about political unrest or the spread of sickness could determine whether a pilgrim group pressed on or decided to wait. This placed the merchant in a powerful, ethically ambiguous position. His advice, given over a transaction for hay, could alter the course of a sacred journey. Was he a pious man, genuinely aiding the faithful, or was he a profiteer, steering pilgrims toward inns where he got a kickback, or spreading fear to sell more of his own provisions? The truth, as always, was a blend. The line between service and exploitation was as dusty as the pilgrim road itself. His hay was a tangible need, but the information he sold with it was the true commodity, a fragile thing woven from gossip and hope, bought and sold at the crossroads of faith and commerce. That pilgrim road, however, was merely a practice run for the ultimate logistical nightmare. When a king called his banners and an army marched to war, the humble hay merchant transformed into something far more critical, a forerunner to the modern military contractor. Supplying an army on campaign was the peak of his profession, a venture of staggering risk and even greater potential reward. Picture the chaotic columns snaking across the countryside. At the front, the glittering knights and men at arms. Behind them, a miles-long tail of chaos known as the baggage train, a mobile marketplace of desperation. Here, among the carts of blacksmiths, armorers, and sutlers selling ale, marched the hay merchants with their wagons. They were not officially part of the army. They were private entrepreneurs following the scent of profit. And the profit was astronomical. A load of hay that cost 3 pence in a peaceful market could be sold for 20 pence or more to a desperate cavalry commander whose horses were growing weak. This was price gouging raised to an art form fueled by absolute necessity. An army that ran out of fodder stopped moving. Its knights became foot soldiers, its supply wagons ground to a halt. The merchant held the very mobility of the force in his barns on wheels, but this golden opportunity was shadowed by constant, visceral danger. The merchant and his precious cargo were trapped in the lawless world of the camp. His wagons were a magnet for theft. Hungry soldiers, paid irregularly or not at all, might simply take what they needed, offering threats instead of coin. A rival lord's foraging party, operating with semi-official license, could confiscate his entire stock as a contribution to the war effort, leaving him ruined. The greatest fear was being caught in a sudden enemy raid targeting the soft, vulnerable baggage train. A merchant could lose not just his hay, but his carts, his horses, and his life, all in a screaming, confusing moment of violence. This environment bred a unique and morally ambiguous figure. The successful military hay merchant had to be part businessman, part diplomat, and part hardened survivor. He needed written contracts signed and sealed by high-ranking quartermasters to give his trade a thin veneer of legitimacy. He cultivated fierce protectors, perhaps hiring a band of retired men at arms as guards, or securing the personal favor of a powerful baron who valued his reliable supply. His loyalty was to his purse, not to any crown or cause. He would, if the price was right and the risk manageable, sell fodder to either side in a conflict. This was commerce in its purest, most ruthless form, profiting directly from the machinery of destruction. Yet this very ruthlessness could be the path to the highest rewards. A merchant who consistently delivered, who braved the dangers of the campaign trail and kept a prince's cavalry fed, could earn something far more valuable than silver, royal favor. He might be granted a lucrative monopoly on supplying the royal stables in peacetime. He could receive grants of land confiscated from rebels. In rare, celebrated cases for truly extraordinary service, a wealthy hay merchant could even be knighted, his family name lifted from the dusty marketplace into the landed gentry. His fortune, literally built on bales of grass, could buy the ultimate medieval prize, a noble title and a coat of arms. This was the dizzying pinnacle of the trade, where the smell of hay and horses mingled with the scent of blood and ambition, and where a man could trade fodder for a legacy. Yet that military fortune, built on fire and fodder, could vanish in an instant back home. The hay merchant's greatest asset was also his city's greatest terror. Storing mountains of sun-dried grass within the heart of a medieval town was like stacking kindling next to a forge. Every timber-framed house, every thatched roof was potential fuel, and the merchant's loft packed to the rafters was the match waiting to be struck. This was the 13th and most perilous mystery, how the quest for profit created a permanent, smoldering threat to urban life. The great city fires that periodically scourged medieval Europe were often not accidents of cooking hearths, but industrial-scale disasters born in the hay trade. London's Great Fire of 1212, which devastated the southern bank of the Thames, was famously and devastatingly linked to hay. A spark from a careless worker, a dropped lantern, or the dreaded spontaneous combustion from a damp bale could ignite an entire district. The fire would leap from a merchant's loft to neighboring roofs with terrifying speed, fanned by the wind and fed by the very commodity meant to fuel horses, not flames. In moments, a commercial asset became an urban weapon. City authorities lived in dread of this scenario. They passed law after law in a desperate battle to control the uncontrollable. Statutes forbade the storage of hay within the city walls, or demanded it be kept only in stone-built warehouses, a luxury few merchants could afford. They set strict limits on how much could be stored in one place, and required wide alleys between haylofts to act as fire breaks. Night watchmen were instructed to pay special attention to these buildings, their noses alert for the first sweet scent of smoldering grass. For the merchant, these regulations were a direct attack on his business model. Central storage near the markets and wharves was essential for efficiency and profit. Moving his operation outside the walls meant higher transport costs, vulnerability to thieves, and a loss of competitive edge. The result was a constant, low-grade war of evasion. A merchant might bribe the alderman's inspector to overlook a few extra tons in his attic. He might rent multiple small cellars across the city, splitting his stock to stay under the legal limits for any single location, creating not one risk but a dozen scattered ones. He operated in a gray area where civic safety and private enterprise were locked in a deadly embrace. This tension framed a fundamental medieval conflict, the struggle between commerce and community. The hay merchant provided a vital service, the fuel that kept the city's economy moving. His carts brought goods to market, his fodder powered the mills, and his contracts supplied the watchmen's horses. Yet his very presence, his necessary stockpile, put every shop, every home, and every church around him in mortal danger. A single moment of negligence could erase a neighborhood built over generations. The merchant thus lived with a dual identity. To his customers and partners, he was a pillar of practical commerce. To the anxious families living in the shadow of his barn, he was a sleeping dragon, a necessary evil they tolerated with held breath. His success was measured not just in silver, but in the number of uneventful seasons that passed without the alarm bell ringing and the desperate cry of fire echoing through the narrow streets. In the end, the hay in his loft was more than a commodity. It was a pact with the city itself, a volatile promise of prosperity that could, at any moment, turn to ash. The scent of hay was not the only thing that clung to a merchant's clothes. Sometimes it was the faint, metallic tang of evasion. While kings and lords saw the hay trade as a vital resource to be taxed and controlled, the merchants saw it as a puzzle to be solved, with every toll gate and royal agent representing another obstacle to their profit. Their 14th and most routine secret was a life spent as a tax evader, a master of creative avoidance in a world hungry for its share. Three main burdens weighed on every wagon load. First were the market tolls, fees paid to a town or city for the right to sell within its walls. Then came the various passage tolls, like pontage for crossing a bridge or murage for entering a city gate. But the most dreaded was the royal prize. This was the king's ancient right to purchase provisions, including hay, for his armies at a price he set, often far below the market rate. For a merchant, a royal prize order was not a patriotic duty, it was a confiscation, a forced sale that could wipe out a season's profit with a stroke of a quartermaster's quill. To survive, they became illusionists. One common trick was disguising the cargo itself. A load of valuable meadow hay might be topped with a thick layer of worthless straw. To a toll keeper glancing from his booth, it all looked the same, and the merchant paid the cheaper toll rate for straw. More elaborate deceptions involved the carts. Some were built with false bottoms or hollow axles, their official cargo measured and taxed, while a hidden compartment below carried an extra half load of untaxed premium hay. The most brazen method was simply to avoid the official routes altogether. This meant moving under cover of darkness, using forgotten forest tracks and shallow river fords where no toll keeper stood watch. It was risky, slow work, the wagons creaking through the blackness, the drivers guiding the horses by memory and the faint light of a shuttered lantern. Every rustle in the undergrowth could be a robber, or worse, a king's forester on patrol. This shadow economy required a network of complicity. Success depended on knowing which officials were corruptible. A merchant learned which bridge keeper would, for a few silver pennies and a jug of good ale, look the other way as an overloaded cart rumbled past. He knew which city gate guard would mark his ledger for a smaller quantity than was actually brought in. These were not one-time bribes, but ongoing relationships, a silent investment in greasing the wheels of commerce. The truly honest merchant, the one who paid every toll in full and accepted every royal prize without complaint, was a rare and often struggling breed. His competitors, operating in the grey margins, could consistently undercut his prices, forcing him to either join their game or go out of business. This constant, thrilling dance with authority became part of the trade's fabric. It was a game of wits where a merchant's sharp eye for a lenient official or a moonless night was as valuable as his skill at judging hay quality. Each successful evasion was a small victory, a few extra coins kept from the crown's coffers and tucked into his own strongbox. It made every journey a calculated risk, turning the peaceful countryside into a chessboard of secret paths and negotiated loyalties, where the price of hay was not just set by the market, but by a man's willingness to step into the shadows. The dusty ledger of a successful hay merchant held one final, tantalizing page, the deed to a manor. For a handful of the most ambitious, the fortune built on bales of grass became a ticket out of the marketplace and into the landed gentry, a 15th mystery of social alchemy. This was the ultimate transformation, turning hay into hereditary title, but it required a merchant to perform a delicate and often ruthless magic on his own past. Consider a man we might call Robert of Stamford. Through decades of sharp dealing, supplying royal garrisons and monastic houses, he amassed a hoard of silver that rivaled a minor baron's. His moment came when a neighboring knight, ruined by ransom payments after a disastrous campaign, was forced to sell his ancestral lands. Robert stepped in with a chest of coin, purchasing not just the manor house and its fields, but the very social position of the man he displaced. Overnight, merchant Robert became lord of the manor Robert, yet the purchase was only the first step. The true work was in the rewriting. The new lord would commission a family history, perhaps from a sympathetic monk at a local abbey. This document would quietly erase the hay carts and market tolls. Instead, it might claim a vague but noble ancestor who fought with the conqueror, a lineage temporarily fallen into obscurity but now rightfully restored through Robert's own prudent management. The hay that built his fortune was recast not as trade, but as the wise stewardship of agricultural estates he had always, in spirit, been destined to own. The most direct path to legitimacy, however, was through marriage. A merchant's greatest asset could be a daughter with a massive dowry of pure silver. A cash-poor but ancient knightly family, clinging to a crumbling castle and a proud name, often faced a stark choice: marry for love and fade into poverty, or marry for money and secure their lineage. The hay merchant's daughter, educated, polished, and bearing a dowry that could re-roof the hall and stock the pastures, became an irresistible prospect. In the marriage contract, the social exchange was explicit: her new wealth for his old name. Her children would be born into the gentry, their mother's origins softened into a story of a wealthy burgher family, or forgotten entirely in the rush to claim their father's heraldic legacy. The merchant himself, now father-in-law to a knight, gained reflected status and a foothold in the world of courtly influence. He might finance his son-in-law's participation in a royal tournament, the investment further laundering his commercial wealth into chivalric spectacle. The crown itself could be the agent of this transformation. In times of war, a king needed financiers as much as he needed fighters. A hay merchant who consistently, reliably supplied the royal armies, perhaps even advancing loans to the perpetually cash-strapped royal treasury, performed a service as vital as any battlefield victory. In gratitude and to secure his future loyalty, a monarch might grant the merchant a knighthood. This was not the knighthood of the warrior, earned with a sword, but a civil knighthood recognizing financial prowess. The newly minted Sir Merchant would be expected to abandon his trade, for a knight could not be seen laboring in the marketplace. He would invest his capital entirely in land, adopting the lifestyle and duties of the gentry, serving as a justice of the peace or a sheriff. His old colleagues would now address him as my lord, a gulf of manners and privilege separating them forever. In his new manor, the evidence of his past was systematically erased or hidden. The functional timber barns of his youth were replaced with ornamental stone dovecotes. The account books that detailed the price per load of clover hay were locked away, replaced with estate rolls listing tenant rents and the yield of demesne fields. The smell of grass and horses was exchanged for the scent of beeswax and herbs in a great hall. He had crossed a social Rubicon, but the crossing demanded a sacrifice of memory. His story, the ingenious, gritty, and ambitious climb from the wharfside to the high table, became the family's deepest secret, a mystery buried beneath layers of tapestries and manufactured lineage. The haystack had been his foundation, but the final act of his success was to pretend it had never existed at all. But a hayfield was never just a field of grass. To the untrained eye, it was a simple, golden expanse. To a knowledgeable local, it was a hidden pharmacy, a living chest of botanical secrets. This 16th layer of the trade reveals the hay merchant as an accidental herbalist and the meadow itself as a source of medicine and mystery. Medieval hay meadows were not the monoculture fields of today. They were rich, biodiverse tapestries of grasses, wildflowers, and herbs all growing together. When the scythe swept through, they collected not just fodder, but chamomile for soothing nerves, yarrow for staunching wounds, and the vibrant St. John's wort, believed to ward off melancholy. This wild bounty did not go unnoticed. The merchant, or more often the village wise women who assisted with the harvest, possessed a deep oral knowledge of these plants. As they worked, their sharp eyes could spot a cluster of valuable herbs amidst the common grass. With a quick, discreet motion, they might tuck a handful of purple bitony or silvery wormwood into their apron, setting it aside. This was a secret harvest within a harvest. These collected botanicals were worth far more, ounce for ounce, than the hay itself. Dried and bundled, they could be sold separately to the apothecaries in town, who used them to prepare tinctures, poultices, and healing salves. For the merchant, this was a delightful secondary income stream, a hidden premium on a standard load. A cart of hay from a particularly herb-rich meadow might come with a small, precious sack of dried flowers on the side, sold under the counter for a handsome profit. This practice added a profound layer of botanical secrecy to the trade. It meant that the value of a meadow was not just in the volume of grass it produced, but in the silent, healing wealth growing between the stems. A lord selling the hay right to his land might have no idea that the true treasure was being quietly gleaned by the harvesters, their knowledge a form of silent intellectual property. This also introduced an element of danger, for the line between healing and harming was thin. Some of the same meadows that yielded gentle chamomile might also contain potent, dangerous plants like foxglove or hemlock. A wise woman knew the difference, but what if a less scrupulous collector mixed them in? The potential for mistake or even deliberate poisoning was a quiet undercurrent. It meant that trust in your hay supplier extended beyond the health of your animals to the hidden contents of the bale. Could a rival's sudden illness be traced back to a peculiar batch of fodder? It was an unanswerable question in an age before toxicology, but a suspicion that would have lingered in the mind of anyone who understood the meadow's dual nature. The haystack, therefore, was not merely fuel or a financial instrument. It was a compressed ecosystem holding within its dusty confines the potential for both vitality and venom. A final, fragrant reminder that in the medieval world, even the most ordinary things were woven through with extraordinary and often secret power. A royal tournament was a hungry beast, and its appetite for hay was nearly limitless. For the merchant who secured the exclusive supply contract, a week of jousting and feasting was not a holiday. It was the logistical challenge of a lifetime. His role expanded far beyond fodder salesman. He became the unofficial quartermaster of spectacle, the man responsible for ensuring the pageantry never faltered for lack of straw. The sheer volume needed was staggering. Hundreds of knights would arrive, each with a retinue of squires, men-at-arms, and multiple horses. Every stall in the temporary stables erected around the lists had to be thickly bedded with fresh straw daily. The tournament grounds themselves were often covered with it to absorb mud and cushion falls. Grand viewing stands for nobles and their ladies required bales for seating. The merchants' carts formed a continuous supply line, a golden river flowing into the heart of the event. But his duties did not end at the stables. His product was essential for the comfort and hygiene of the encampment that sprang up around the tournament field. Tents were floored with straw. Kitchens and butchers' areas used it to soak up waste. Even the latrine trenches were lined with it. A merchant who failed to deliver enough clean, fresh straw risked more than a financial penalty. He risked creating a smelly, muddy, and deeply embarrassing situation for the hosting lord in front of the most critical audience imaginable, his rival peers. The social stakes were terrifyingly high. Imagine the disaster if, on the third day of a major tournament, the straw ran out. The host lord's pavilion, where he entertained visiting dukes and earls, would still have its floor covering, but the lesser knights' tents would become damp and foul. The stables would turn into a quagmire, the valuable horses standing in muck, their health at risk. The spectacle of chivalry would quickly descend into a farce of discomfort, and the blame would fall squarely on the merchant who had promised mountains of straw and delivered only a hill. His reputation and likely his freedom would be forfeit. This pressure forged a unique kind of showman, the successful tournament merchant planned with military precision. He surveyed the site weeks in advance, calculating the number of animals, the size of the expected crowd, and even the weather. He secured multiple sources for straw, often from distant manors, to ensure a single local failure wouldn't cripple him. He hired extra carts and drivers, organizing them into shifts to keep the supply flowing day and night. He stationed his own men at key points, the stable master's tent, the head groom's post, to receive constant updates on consumption rates. He was not just selling a commodity, he was selling seamless experience. A flawless tournament where the horses gleamed, the stands were comfortable, and the grounds remained pristine, was a silent testament to the host's wealth and organizational genius. The merchant's invisible work made that illusion possible. His reward was immense. The profit from a single large tournament could eclipse a year's normal trade. More importantly, it brought unparalleled visibility. Every great lord in attendance saw his efficiency. A job well done meant a flood of future contracts, not just for tournaments, but for fairs, coronation pageants, and any event where crowds and animals gathered. He became the go-to expert for medieval event planning. His name whispered in royal chambers when the next great celebration was being devised. In this role, the hay merchant stepped out of the shadows of necessity and into the limelight of pleasure. He enabled the fantasy of chivalry, ensuring the knights could focus on glory while he managed the gritty, golden reality beneath their feet. His success was measured in the absence of complaint, in the rustle of dry straw underfoot, and in the continued pride of a lord whose greatest day was not ruined by a shortage of the most humble thing. The ledger's neat columns of figures told a story of trust, but a blank space where payment should be was a declaration of war. In a world built on promises, collecting what was owed became the merchant's most perilous task, a dance on the knife edge between ruin and retribution. The 18th mystery of this hidden world is the debt collector's grim arithmetic, where a hay bill could lead from a courtroom to a darkened alley. Consider a merchant who had faithfully supplied a powerful Benedictine abbey for an entire season. The monks promised payment after the autumn wool sales, but the sales were poor, and the abbey's treasurer offered only prayers and apologies. The merchant now faced a terrible dilemma. He could not simply stop supplying the abbey, for that would burn the bridge forever and likely get him blacklisted by other religious houses. Yet his own creditors, the carters and the rural producers he had paid on promise, were now pounding on his door. His entire web of credit was at risk of unraveling because one major node had failed. His first move was always diplomacy, a polite but firm reminder delivered by a trusted agent. Often this worked. The social shame of being a welcher, especially for an institution like a monastery or a lord concerned with honor, was a powerful motivator. But when shame was not enough, the merchant had to escalate. He might hire a professional debt collector, a man whose reputation preceded him. These were not lawyers but enforcers, often retired soldiers or men with connections to the local underworld. Their method was psychological pressure. They would appear at the Abbey Gatehouse or the Lord's Manor, not causing a scene but simply being present, a silent, grim reminder of the obligation. They would talk to the debtors' servants in the tavern, letting the story of the unpaid hay bill spread as gossip, tarnishing the debtor's reputation for reliability. For a knight whose word was his bond, this social corrosion could be more damaging than any financial penalty. If intimidation failed, the merchant's final recourse was the law. He would petition the local manor court or the town's merchant guild, presenting his signed contract or ledger entry as proof. This was a risky and expensive process. Courts were often biased toward the local landed gentry or the church. A lord might simply claim the hay was of poor quality and had sickened his horses, turning the tables and putting the merchant on the defensive. Even with a judgment in his favor, enforcement was weak. The sheriff might be a friend of the debtor or too busy to seize assets, so the clever merchant often sought alternative currencies. He might propose a settlement not in silver but in kind. The defaulting lord could grant him the valuable hay-cutting rights to a particular stream meadow for the next 10 years. A monastery might offer a lease on a profitable mill or a parcel of farmland at a favorable rate. This transformed a bad debt into a long-term asset, weaving the merchant even deeper into the fabric of local power. The most valuable settlement of all was political protection. A baron, unable to pay a large fodder bill, might instead grant the merchant his formal patronage. This meant the merchant could use the baron's name and crest on his carts, a powerful deterrent against toll collectors, rivals, and thieves. In effect, the debt was paid with a license to operate with impunity under a noble umbrella. But not all stories ended with negotiation. In the rougher ports or border regions, a defaulted debt could spark outright violence. A merchant who had supplied a band of mercenary captains might find his requests for payment met with drawn daggers. His only hope then was to have hired tougher men of his own, turning a business dispute into a street brawl. This constant shadow of potential conflict meant a successful merchant needed a blend of traits: the patience of a diplomat, the cunning of a lawyer, and the hardened resolve of a street fighter. His ledger was not just a financial document, it was a map of alliances and animosities, of promises kept and betrayals simmering. Every unpaid entry was a crack in the foundation of his world, and his survival depended on knowing whether to patch it with parchment, with property, or with the quiet threat of force. A border was not just a line on a map, it was a marketplace of whispers. In the contested lands between kingdoms where loyalty shifted with the wind, the hay merchant's wagon became a rolling embassy of its own. His trade in fodder was a passport, granting him access to fortresses, stables, and camps on both sides of a conflict. This placed him in an impossible, dangerous position, for the very grass he sold was now a direct measure of military readiness. A lord on the Scottish side of the borders, preparing for a raid into England, would need to stockpile hay for his mounted raiders. An English garrison commander, anticipating that raid, would be doing the exact same thing. The merchant supplying both men held a devastating secret in his ledger. He knew precisely who was buying more and when. This knowledge was worth more than any bale of clover hay, and it made him a target for every spymaster and intelligence officer in the region. Consider a merchant based in a bustling town like Berwick-upon-Tweed, a place that changed hands between Scotland and England for centuries. To survive, he traded with everyone. He would deliver oats and hay to the English garrison in the castle one week, and then take a wagon load of the same goods to a Scottish laird's tower house the next. His movements were routine, expected, and above suspicion, for he was just a simple trader keeping the local economy and the local horses fed. This perfect cover was irresistible to men who dealt in secrets. An English agent might corner the merchant after a sale. The conversation would start politely, inquiring about the health of the laird's herds, the quality of his pastures. Then it would turn. The agent might remind the merchant of the hefty tolls he avoided last season, or of a relative living safely under English protection. The request was never a direct order, it was a suggestion wrapped in a threat. On your next visit to the laird, just note how many new horses are in his stables. See if his men are repairing saddles or forging new arrowheads. Is the hay you delivered last month already gone, consumed by a hidden mustering force? The merchant faced a brutal choice: refuse, and he could find his trade licenses revoked, his wagons confiscated, or his family threatened. Comply, and he became a traitor in the eyes of the other side, a crime punishable by hanging if discovered. Many chose a third path, a dance of calculated omission. They would provide just enough vague, outdated information to satisfy their handler, while carefully avoiding any detail that could lead to immediate ambush or slaughter. They became masters of the harmless truth. Yes, the laird's hay stores are low, but that is because of a wet summer, not because he has extra horses. Yes, the English captain bought more fodder, but he always does before the harvest festival to feed visiting officials. This double game required a steel nerve. Every trip across the border was now an interrogation. A Scottish border reiver buying hay might casually ask what the English were paying for fodder these days. A simple question about market rates was also a probe into the garrison's financial health. A merchant's shrug and a complaint about greedy wholesalers could be a life-saving performance. The stakes were highest with the premium goods. A shipment of that high-protein legume hay, the kind that built muscle and stamina in warhorses, was a flashing beacon. If a merchant known to supply the French crown suddenly diverted a large, unexpected shipment of clover hay to a fortress town in the Holy Roman Empire, it was not a simple business decision. It was a signal. It could mean a secret treaty had been struck, that German cavalry were being brought to the frontier to support a French campaign. Rival powers maintained networks of informants whose sole job was to track these fodder shipments, trying to read the intentions of armies in the movement of grass. The merchant, in this light, was no longer just a passive observer. By choosing where to sell and to whom, he was actively shaping the strategic landscape. Withholding fodder from one side could be as impactful as delivering it to the other. A well-timed shortage engineered by a merchant in league with a foreign power could delay a cavalry deployment by weeks, altering the course of a campaign. This transformed the humble hay ledger into a potential document of state treason. If captured, its pages would be scoured not for debts but for patterns. Purchases by a certain nobleman, spaced at regular intervals, could reveal the hidden location of a mustering point. A sudden cessation of sales to a border castle might indicate it had been secretly reinforced and was now drawing supplies from a different internal route. The merchant's life depended on the opacity of his records. He might develop a private code using symbols for his clients instead of names, or recording quantities in a jumbled order only he could decipher. In the end, his greatest asset was his apparent mundanity. He was a man of commerce, not of crowns, who would suspect that the fellow haggling over the price of a load of straw in a smoky tavern was also deciding which king's secrets to sell and which to bury in the golden, silent depths of his next wagon load. The borderlands taught a final, grim lesson. In a world of shifting allegiances, the most powerful loyalty was not to a flag, but to the survival of one's own trade, a truth that made the hay merchant the most reluctant and perhaps the most valuable spy of all. The quietest legacy of the hay trade is not written on parchment, but etched into the very soil and stone of the countryside. For centuries, the relentless demand for fodder did more than fill barns. It sculpted the landscape, creating a hidden geography of grass that still whispers its purpose to those who know how to look. The most ingenious of these transformations was the water meadow. This was not a simple wet field, but a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering, a living machine designed to grow more hay. On gentle slopes near rivers, medieval farmers and the landlords who financed them dug a complex network of channels, weirs, and sluice gates. In early spring, they would deliberately flood these meadows with a shallow, controlled flow of water. This wasn't to drown the grass, but to nourish it. The moving water carried silt and dissolved nutrients, acting as a natural fertilizer. More importantly, the water insulated the young grass shoots from frost, triggering an earlier, lusher growth. A water meadow could produce its first cutting weeks before a dry field, a crucial advantage that meant life or death for livestock after a long winter. The merchant, financing such improvements or contracting to buy the superior early hay, was an invisible partner in this reshaping of the land. You can still see the ghost of this system today in the low, ridge and furrow patterns visible in some old pastures, or in the overgrown channels snaking through river valleys now mistaken for natural streams. This hunger for productive meadow also redrew the map of communal life through enclosure. Common fields where villagers each farmed scattered strips were inefficient for the large-scale hay harvest the market demanded. A lord or a wealthy yeoman, often with a merchant's capital behind him, would seek to consolidate these strips, fencing them off with hedges or ditches to create a single, large private meadow. This act, recorded in manor court rolls, was a social earthquake. It gave the owner control over the timing and method of the hay harvest, maximizing yield for market. But it also took away the common grazing rights that poorer villagers relied upon to feed a cow or a few sheep. The new hedgerow, now a picturesque feature of the English countryside, was often planted in resentment, a living border that divided economic progress from communal tradition. The hay merchant's demand for volume and quality quietly fueled this centuries-long process, turning the open medieval field system into a patchwork of private fields, a change you can read in the very pattern of the land from the air. Finally, the trade dictated the very architecture of the farm. The layout of a medieval homestead was a direct response to the hay cycle. The largest building was always the barn, positioned for access, not for beauty. Its enormous doors, often on two opposite sides, allowed a wagon to drive straight through one side, unload, and exit the other, an efficient flow for harvest time. The placement of the farmhouse, the cattle buyers, and the stables all revolved around this central cathedral of grass. Roads themselves were shaped by hay. The wide, green lanes that still wend through the countryside, often sunken from centuries of use, were not just for people. They were drove roads and hauling paths, worn deep by the endless procession of hay carts from meadow to barn and from barn to market town. Even the location of villages sometimes shifted to be closer to reliable water sources for meadow irrigation, or to new roads built for carting fodder to growing urban markets. So when you look at a rolling green landscape today with its hedgerows, its old barns crumbling at the edge of fields, and its wandering lanes, you are not just seeing nature. You are reading the final, silent chapter of the hay merchant's story. His economic calculations, his contracts, and his need for tons of dried grass literally molded the green and pleasant land, turning ecology into economy, and leaving a mystery in the fields that only archaeology and old maps can now fully decode. That peaceful meadow you see today holds the ghosts of 1,000 whispered deals. The rustic barn, weathered and silent, once echoed with the clink of silver and the rustle of secret ledgers. These were not just pastoral scenes, they were the nerve centers of a hidden empire, built not on stone but on grass. The medieval hay merchant was the ultimate multitasker of the Middle Ages. He was an economist reading the future in the price of a bale. He was a spy decoding military plans from the movement of fodder. He was a master logistician, moving mountains of hay across rivers and through dark forests. And he was a relentless social climber, using his grassy fortune to buy his way into the gentry, one load at a time. His story forces us to look at history from the ground up, literally. We are taught to see the past through the eyes of kings and bishops, through treaties and battles. But the true pulse of the medieval world beat in the market square, in the creak of a hay wagon's axle, and in the dry, sweet smell of a full barn. These were the engines of daily life, the systems that fed armies, powered farms, and quietly transferred wealth and influence. The hay merchant did not just participate in this system, he helped to invent it. He turned a simple agricultural product into a form of currency, a tool of intelligence, and a weapon of social change. His legacy is not in history books, but in the shape of our landscape, in the hedgerows that enclose the common fields, and in the old drove roads that still wander through the countryside. So the next time you pass a field of grass, see it for what it truly was, a medieval power plant, a bank vault, and a chessboard all in one. If you enjoyed uncovering this grassy mystery, uncovering the secret life behind the simplest of things, let us know. Be sure to like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments which other overlooked medieval professions you would like us to investigate next. The past is full of quiet people who made loud history, and we are just getting started.